The losses of the Russian occupiers in the battle for Toretsk in Donetsk Oblast have exceeded 15,000 killed. The total losses, including the wounded, are even greater. This was reported on air by the head of the communications department of the 100 Separate Mechanized Brigade, Captain Sergei Khominsky. As the officer noted, the brigade has been in the Toretsk direction since mid-July 2024. The battle for the city has been going on for 9 months. During this time, the enemy suffered, without any exaggeration, catastrophic losses in manpower. The number of irreparable losses of the enemy exceeded 15,000 in Toretsk. These are the occupiers who were destroyed. If we talk about the total losses of the enemy in our direction during this period, then this is already more than 50,000 personnel. Kremlin propagandists have already announced the liberation of Toretsk several times. We all remember this well. There were even several attempts to hang out a dirty tricolor rag somewhere on the outskirts of Toretsk, but all these attempts failed, said Khominsky. The officer noted that fierce street fighting continues in Toretsk, and contact can be very close. Khominsky recalled that there were situations when Ukrainian and enemy positions in a building were separated only by a corridor. You understand how close this contact is, how fierce the fighting is. He added that the unprecedented battle for Toretsk is possible thanks to the heroism of Ukrainian soldiers. But, first of all, it is the infantry. What our infantry is doing now in Toretsk, perhaps, has no precedent in world military history. So that you understand, it is not possible to change personnel at the positions in Toretsk often. Because entering the positions, leaving the positions is a mortal danger. And so we had cases when a specific fighter was at the positions for 77 days. He returned, rested, and entered the positions again. There were cases when fighters were at the positions in Toretsk for more than 100 days. That is more than 3 months. To say that this is heroism is to say nothing. These are simply titans of people. Our brigade has long been called the Steel 100. You understand why this is so, the officer said. Khominsky explained that Toretsk opens the way for the Russians to Konstantinovka, one of the 4 cities of the Big Belt: Konstantinovka, Drushkovka, Kramatorsk, Slavyansk. Konstantinovka is already getting hit very hard, because the city suffers catastrophically from shelling. If KABs and longer-range things reach Kramatorsk and Slavyansk, then Konstantinovka suffers many times more. Today Konstantinovka, unfortunately, suffers very, very seriously. Not to mention Toretsk. These are no longer ruins, these are already the remains of ruins, he added.
Relations between Russian President Vladimir Putin and Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov have deteriorated significantly in recent months, potentially leading to a new conflict in the North Caucasus. According to the Polish news agency PAP, Polska Agencja Prasowa, the main reason for the worsening of ties between Moscow and Grozny was information obtained by the Russian FSB that Kadyrov was increasingly negotiating with representatives of Middle Eastern countries about the future of his assets and the safety of his family members without the Kremlin's consent. The media has been reporting that Kadyrov has been seriously ill for a long time. Last year, the independent Russian website Novaya Gazeta Europe reported that he had serious problems with his kidneys and pancreas. In recent months, Kadyrov has been increasingly absent from public life. The Chechen leader, who has 12 children, knows what awaits his family members after his death. He does not believe in the promises made by the federal center and the reliability of security guarantees. Therefore, the 48-year-old Kadyrov has to look for guarantees for his family members in the Middle East. The Chechen leader has friendly relations with the leaders of these countries. Although Kadyrov tried to hide his negotiations from the Kremlin, the FSB found out about it and informed Putin. Kadyrov's behavior has angered the Russian leadership. In addition, the disagreements between Grozny and the Kremlin also weakened the position of Kadyrov's close ally, Russian State Duma deputy Adam Delimkhanov. Since the start of 2025, Delimkhanov has categorically refused to participate in any clarification of relations by various means of force, no matter what the amount is. Delimkhanov tells those who turn to him that there is an order from above that Chechen leaders and the leaders of the power structures should not get involved in such matters and should generally be less visible, the publication Vazny Istorii reported. Thus, the political conflict between the Kremlin and the Chechen leader is rapidly growing. According to analysts, if the agreements with the Chechen clan are violated, Russia may face a third Chechen war. Russian analyst Anatoly Nesmian believes that peace in the region was built on the basis of an agreement with one of the parties to the internal Chechen conflict. If this agreement is violated by Ramzan Kadyrov and his clan, new tensions in Chechnya are inevitable. Nesmian believes that in this case, the situation will very quickly go beyond a local conflict and turn into a clear anti-colonial war. In his opinion, the relations between Chechnya and Russia are a colonial model, dependent on a loyal local administration. Kadyrov was given immense privileges in exchange for his loyalty to the Kremlin. And now, if this model disappears, or Kadyrov loses Moscow's support, a power vacuum will arise in Chechnya, which will inevitably lead to an attempt to legitimize himself through a struggle with the federal center. If the current agreement between the Kremlin and Grozny fails, the new stage of the conflict will not simply repeat the previous two Chechen wars. It will already have the character of a civil war and will affect not only Chechnya but also other republics of the North Caucasus, where similar feelings have long been rife. At a time when the state's resources are depleted and trust in the center is declining, Russia is facing the risk of entering a new large-scale internal war, writes the Ukrainian portal Dialogue UA. The occupation forces of the aggressor country Russia are setting up shelters and firing points along the road from Chernomorskoy to Yevpatoria and further to Saki. This was reported by the Telegram channel Krymsky Vita. Locals report that the Russians have set up fortifications of concrete and sandbags along the entire road. Enemy personnel are also stationed along the highway and at intersections. The enemy troops explain such preparations by the need to repel possible attacks by the Ukrainian military. However, this version is most likely nothing more than a cover. The thing is that the occupiers need to use the funds allocated for defense, but half of them have already been stolen. That is why they are setting up fortifications in Crimea. Military experts believe that after the liberation of Kherson and the complete clearing of the right bank, Ukrainian troops will not be in a hurry to force the Dnipro to begin the liberation of the left bank. After the control of the city passed into the hands of the Ukrainian army, it is likely that the command will give an order to set up artillery positions for striking the deep rear of the Russians on the left bank. The liberation of Kherson and the right bank of the region will allow the armed forces of Ukraine to significantly increase their firepower on the territory, which acts as a military hub for the occupiers. In addition, analysts say that control of the city would expand Ukraine's capabilities and weaken Russia's ability to hold the territory it still controls, including occupied Crimea. The scenarios for the return of Crimea are completely different, but the conclusion of all experts and the military is the same. Crimea will return to Ukraine. Recently, Ukrainian intelligence officers carried out large-scale attacks on Russian occupiers' facilities in Crimea for several days in a row. In particular, a helicopter, the ship Fyodor Uryupin, and more than 10 radar stations were hit. Earlier, it also became known that Ukrainian intelligence officers attacked the TOR-M2 anti-aircraft missile system of the occupation forces, and drones of the Gumagu Special Forces unit attacked Russian ships in the Crimea. Let us recall that media wrote that in March, unmanned systems of the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine attacked Crimea for several days. The strikes were carried out on Russian radar stations, air defense systems, sea vessels, and even a helicopter.